Good evening, students. Welcome to the fourth class of this course, POL 2260, Comparative Politics. I'm going to be talking today about political economy. So you'll be learning about the nuts and bolts of political economy. Well, you might think economics, what's political economy? The field itself was known political economy. When you go back to 1776, yeah, I know you're thinking about the independence. Scottish philosopher actually wrote a book called Adam Smith, his name, wrote a book called Wealth of Nations. Okay. And since then, economics books were political philosophy, including politics and economics. It affects large scale macroeconomics. But then in the 20th century, it become separated and become very applied economics, mathematical. Anyway, so we're going to learn some nuts and bolts, especially this is a political science class, economics relevant to the politics of it, especially comparative politics of it, we're going to talk about and you will learn. The first thing, two things are important in political economy. What is it? The first one is markets. That's right, markets. Because if you go to a communistic country, there's no private property, there's no markets. Here, there's a market. When I say a market, what comes to your mind? Yes, a marketplace. Immediately. It could be something which you go in person and shop, or because of internet, the biggest online store, Amazon, is a market as well. So what happens there? Buyers and sellers meet. Meet for what? Meet for exchange of goods. In Amazon, it's goods. Actually, they do sell services as well. For example, to put your TV and screw it up on the wall or air conditioner, anything, they come and give you service as well. So, but American economy, if you look, it's more than a manufacturing. It's a service industry. Okay, whereas you go to other countries, the percentage of GDP is larger than America in manufacturing sector. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about trade. So markets is an first important aspect. In that, the seller always wants to create demand. Write it down. Buyer wants a lower price. Where they meet, sale happens. Exchange of goods and services for a price. Okay, that's market. Now there's a second important one, and that's called property. Property. This is the one which John Locke wrote about in two treatises of government we talked about, and private property is vital in it advocated for a small government. Remember that? So property, when I talk about property, what comes to your mind? It's ownership. Ownership of goods and services, right? And you own it, but there has to be a government role involved in it. What is the role? The government has to oversee and have property rights. If there is a dispute between two people in who owns that, okay, and government has to settle down. So if there is an invention you do, that will be called intellectual property, okay? And say telephone. There was actually a debate before Alexander Graham Bell went, right after that there was another guy who went to patent it. See, we don't even know the second guy. The guy who comes second, nobody remembers, only the first. In Olympics, this is Jerry Seinfeld joke. Anyway, the debate was settled by the government. Government settles the disputes in private property. So that means government means what? Court. The court settles the disputes. So government role is involved in private property. If you go to third world countries, as we are talking about comparative politics, they do not have proper role of government in private property. So DeSoto, a very famous economist, wrote a book called Mystery of Capital. In that he talks about many third world countries, through his research he found, have private properties Disputes are not settled. So if I have a problem, my home is claimed by another person also that land, I cannot take that document to a bank to get a loan to start a business, right? So then it's in limbo. It's not settled down. United States, the courts move fast. I come from India, and there are many disputes. Takes not just months, years and decades. Courts lag behind, are burdened, overburdened. So this is a problem for economic growth. Okay, so a strong role by the government in private property rights is vital. So now we talked about intellectual property. So I want to talk the definition intellectual property. What does that mean? It comes from the intellect. It's not tangible. It could be made into tangible thing later, like the telephone I mentioned. But an idea, it could be a novel you wrote, a poem you wrote. It could be a music. Beyonce has rights for her songs. She writes that, right? And it could be an invention, a new type of phone you could create, and you could patent it. Who gives the patent? The government gives the patent. So intellectual property is also part of the property, and you have the property rights written for it. You following? Congress actually, to be precise, when I say government in the United States, intellectual property. Okay, so now you understand market and property. Let's learn other things. Write down this important aspect when it comes to politics and economy. Public good. Write it down. Public good. 2 words. What do you mean public good? Public good is 2 things has to satisfy. There's a private good, my hat, right? And my glasses, my marker, private. I bought it, I own it. Similarly, you own certain things. It doesn't need to be a huge house or a car. It could be simple things like this. Public good has to have satisfied 2 points. It's neither excludable nor it's rivalrous. That means if I'm wearing this jacket, okay, another person cannot wear it. Similarly, if I have my own party, private party, I could exclude others. I could choose who I want. It's private property. I'll give you a better example. If you're close to Baruch College, there's a park. That's the only park in New York City, which is a private. It has, people have to have a key. The people who live around there have a key and use it to open it and go in. It's just 1-2 blocks from Baruch College. Whereas Manhattan Central Park, anyone can have access. That's a public good. You cannot exclude. It's non-rivalrous. A billionaire can walk in, a poor man can walk in. And where is the money to take care of the park comes from? Taxes, right? Taxes paid by New York City residents. Even though the poor man, or even say a homeless person, doesn't have the money to pay it at all, he still get to enjoy it. And a billionaire perhaps might have paid more money and still get to enjoy it equally or lesser because the homeless man might be there longer time to enjoy it. So you cannot. Another good example of public good is national security. It protects a poor man and a rich man in the same way from the threat of an enemy from outside the United States. So you're following what public good is? Some countries, oil is a public good. Oh yeah, like Saudi Arabia. Yeah, it's not equally distributed to all the people, but still public good. Qatar, you get money. If you're married and they give you a land, they give you yearly, you have to be a Qatari citizen every year. And you're like, wow, I would like to move there, pack my bags. You're not going to get citizenship. And also, you can move to Alaska. Alaska shares its oil revenue with the Alaskan citizen. That's right. And there are other countries, Mexico, Brazil. And so they distribute. And that is a public good obtained from under the ground. And it's shared, the wealth is shared with its citizens. Are you following? That's a public good. Now, social expenditure. Write it down, social expenditure. What is social expenditure? Social expenditure is, oh, that happens only in communistic countries. It happens even in liberalism, private property rights holding, high market-driven countries like United States as well. For example, our transportation roads, not the buses, that's private, and there are government ones like the train, MTA, but I'm talking about the roads. That's a public good. It's laid by taxpayer dollars. What about K to 12 education? That's a public good. And that's a social expenditure based on the taxes paid by Americans. If it's a federal government, or you also pay state tax. If you live in New York City, you pay city taxes as well. So you're following me? So there are different forms of expenditure. Of course, the United States do not have a government program, fully funded government program for healthcare as countries like Canada or the US, where their social expenditure includes that. In the United States, it is the biggest budget. It's the healthcare is a big budget. Despite our biggest budget and more spending per person than any other country, our health is not as good. That's a whole nother topic. You could take a whole class on it, why that is. And I have my own opinions on it, but let's move on. And the next thing I want you to learn is taxation, because we talked about taxation. If you're interested in this topic, you might think, oh, taxes, boring, not doing like taxes. Studying, comparing taxes, it's a fascinating field, okay? And there's a good book I read a while ago, A Fine Mess Tax. It's a comparative study of showing how taxes is done in other countries, like Japan. They don't sit for hours and hours and go into H&R Block and file for taxes. Their taxes, whether they owe or the government owes, the check comes to your box. They know it. Even US government know it. Do you know you could trick the government? They know it. If you trick it, they will find it, and that's how they get in trouble. So the government created laws that, in fact, keeps private companies like H&R Block and others in business. It's a billions of dollars industry. Many people go to this. These laws are complicated. Whereas if you look at many of the Nordic area European countries, they file for taxes postcard, and online you file, and you get how much you're going to get, and that's it. It takes 10-15 minutes. Here, you got to take hours and hours collecting all these documents to go and file. It's a complex process. So taxes, they collect and they use for what? Yes, social expenditure, but also it is a form of fiscal policy. Collecting taxes and spending it for putting roads or highways, bridges, nuclear reactor, defense budget, you name it, or NASA, anything, it's expense. Taxes and expense is a way to control an economy. That is one way to control. Control means, because if you're driving a car, say, this is my simple analogy, a gasoline used is the one with the accelerator drives the car forward. That's the market. But you need government, which is like the brake, to make sure it's safe, right? So the government plays a role. How? I'm going to explain soon. Hold on until then. So there's a second part to the government role, and it's called monetary policy. The first one is taxation, expenditure, fiscal policy. The next one is monetary policy. Monetary policy. In monetary policy, the government sets the interest rate for the country. The Federal Reserve Bank sets the interest rate for how much money, who prints the money? The government prints the money. And they loan money to private banks. And what interest? So interest varies based on whether the country is going through inflation or deflation. Don't worry if you don't know. I'm going to explain what inflation and deflation is. That's why I said I will be explained soon. So the country, another way to control monetary policy. There's a fun book I recently read, The Deficit Myth, if you're interested. For those students who want to read and learn extra, you could read. It's about modern monetary theory. You're like, oh God, no. It's really amazing, interesting. In simple language, you will understand. The author is an economist who actually played a role with senators in advocating for modern monetary theory. And he's a professor. Beautifully written book. I enjoyed it. And you could read it if you're interested. But coming back to this two pillars of macroeconomics. Macroeconomics. Macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy, taxation and expenditure, and monetary policy, which is the setting of interest rates. Now why do this do this? I'm going to talk about inflation. Inflation. What is inflation? Have you ever thought about it? You heard of this word, right? What is inflation? Inflation is there's too much money in the market. Everybody has money in the market. Then the goods, supply of goods, the number of apartments in New York is less, say, and there's more money. Then the prices will start to go up. So prices go up. That's inflation. Are you following? So in a simple words to explain it is demand overstrips supply. Demand overstrips supply. Okay? And so let me put it in this way. Simple examples are easier to understand. Say this marker is $2. And then in a month, the marker becomes $3. How much percentage inflation? 50% inflation. Say this marker is having more than 50% inflation for 2 months, more than 2 months. Okay, more than 50% inflation for more than 2 months. That's called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation. Hyperinflation will ruin many of the people's monies. Say some people are retired and they say, oh, I got $100,000, okay, or even $1 million, okay, so I could live for another next 20, 30 years. What if that $1 million cannot buy what $1 million can buy before? It suddenly could buy only $200,000 worth of goods. Then you're not going to use the $1 million. That won't take you all the way without working to death. Say if you live 30, 40 years. You think with $200,000 you could manage? No. So suddenly all the money you saved, value went down. If you have borrowed money, that's great. For the borrowers, not for the lenders. The money paying back capacity becomes easier. So inflation, when it happens, what the government does is, what do? If there's too much money in the market, they pull the money in. So they could increase the taxes. And they will increase the interest rates. Interest rates. For what? If they increase the interest rates, the money loaned by the government, Federal Reserve, to the private banks, and the private banks will give a little more percentage profit to lend to individuals. So there will be a higher percentage to borrow. So businessmen will hesitate to take risks. Say, I'm just going to make a number. Say if it is $10, 10% interest rate, okay, somebody is borrowing, then they have to make a 12% profit at least to gain 2%, because you owe the bank 10%, 2% on your investment ROI. So not everybody will borrow, so the economic activity decreases. Are you following? So government plays a role in macroeconomics in putting a stop for inflation. Let me talk a little bit more about hyperinflation. Some countries, hyperinflation have ruined it. Germany, after World War, you know what happened? They put all the money piled up, lit it up so they could be warmer because it's worth like regular paper. In Zimbabwe, the hyperinflation, unbelievable hyperinflation. Just Google $1 trillion, because in order to buy a loaf of bread, you need to take a cartload of money, because the worth of the money is gone down. If 100 Zimbabwe currency would be less valuable. So let me put it about what's the value? 100 trillion. By the way, many of us don't deal with trillion. How much is a billion? 1,000 million makes a billion. 1,000 billion makes a trillion. This is $100 trillion bills they printed, which is worth to US dollars, $30 US. Can you believe? Yeah, you could Google for $100 trillion Zimbabwe notes. You will see that's how inflation could wipe out the value of a money. And government has to play a role. Now you understand political economy. It's not just economics. Politics is involved in it. Similarly, deflation, that's the opposite of inflation. Deflation is a problem. Like 1998 onwards, year by year, Japan was facing it. It's the opposite of inflation. So that means there's not much money in the market. Okay? There is a lot of products. So money, and there's high unemployment. When that happens, actually, deflation is the problem now. 2020, when Corona crisis happened, deflation is the problem. Many of European countries and US face deflation, not inflation. And what do government do? They have to put money out. So they reduce the interest rate when they're doing a monetary policy, because lesser interest rate means more people will borrow businessmen so that they could do business, so a more economic activity in the market. Are you following? Yes? Okay. Now, how much is the percentage? I think I told you already, 0%. Whereas in the 1980, 18%, the Federal Reserve, 18%. Now, 0. Ben Bernanke, who was the Federal Reserve chairman, not now, before, and he said Japan, even though it had 0% tax interest, it did not help. The deflation was there. He said they should have thrown money out to people from helicopters. I'm not joking. He wasn't joking. Seriously, to increase the economic activity. There's a lot more money in your hand. But stimulus checks, if you're getting, that is to improve the economic activity. It's the role of the government. Okay? All right. Now let's talk about externalities. Externality. Write it down. Externalities. Externalities is, okay, I sell this marker to you for $2. You buy it. You use it. But by using it, touching it, the ink touches your head, you get cancer. God forbid. And that is an externality, negative externality. You did not get into agreement with me. You didn't pay $2 for cancer. You bought for the marker, but you got a cancer. So what do you do? You could sue the seller. The seller could be sued by a lawyer in the court. If I have a big business, then I have to compensate if you prove that my ink cost it all the problems. That's a negative externality. So another example would be you have a home near a factory. The factory exhaust is causing you pollution and health problems. That's a negative externality. But because the factory was built there, they say they built the factory after you've been living there for 20 years. Because they built the factory there and your property value goes up. Why did it go up? Because you have a property in the middle of nowhere. Somebody built a Ford factory. Boom, there's employment opportunities, people moving in there, they want to rent your place, your property value goes up. That's a positive externality. Of course, you're not going to sue for that. and the company is not going to come and ask you money for it, but that's a positive externality. Externalities happen outside the sale, market, selling and buying. It could happen without knowledge. And there's another whole thing, Nobel Prize economics, Stiglitz wrote he won the Nobel Prize for asymmetrical information, something the buyer knows, the seller knows, the buyer did not know. But let's move on. Trade, write it down, trade. You know what a trade is, trade between countries, right? You usually dealt in international relations, but there is something you need to know for even comparative politics. Comparative advantage, 2 words. This is a creation from the mind of an economist. His name is Robert Ricardo, an English economist, created this idea called comparative advantage. That is, say you're a country, I'm a country, and you are good at making cars, I'm good at making rice, but you need rice, I need cars. I shouldn't just go start to make cars. You shouldn't start making rice. According to Ricardo, you said we should trade because we should focus on what we are good at and give that as an exchange value for someone who could do it in a more efficient way. Let me give you another example. A doctor, a surgeon, his hourly rate is very high, right? A lawyer who charges $500 an hour, say. And if he is having fun mowing lawn, that's fine. Exercise, that's fine. But if he is just have to do it as a work, he should give that time to the work opportunity to someone who could do it for much cheaper because his hourly rate is much higher. So that's comparative advantage in a simple form. But there are people who criticize later economists, Oxford's in the 21st century have written books. One of them is if countries stick to, if I'm a rice maker, I just want to, according to Ricardo, I should always make rice because that's what I'm good at, then Japan wouldn't have gone from very backward nation to a very high-tech nation, or making cars, which is so efficient. Americans were making great cars, mid 20th century and others. They came and saw it, but they made better. Now you know, Toyota, Honda, those have more resale value than Ford and other cars. So they went on to make good cars. They could do it. They're not sticking to buying just from Americans so that they could sell their rice or textile garments, which they were good at making. Are you following? Okay. Now, let's talk about the second point under trade, tariffs, T-A-R-I-F-F. You know what a tariff is? It's a tax on the imports. So say I'm the leader of the United States, products come in from outside, say they are selling marker, okay, and this marker is for $1, it's coming from China. And here is American marker, okay, and this is say $1.10. And if this is same quality, both are, you're going to buy the dollar one, right? So somebody lobbied me, not somebody, the owner of this American marker, and says, can you put a 20% tariff on this? If you put a 20% tariff, if this becomes $1.20, then this is $1.10. You're going to buy the $1.10 to save American products or American companies. Tariffs. But tariffs are artificial barriers. It's not creating a free trade. It's creating an artificial barrier. So usually free trade economists recommend to create No artificial barriers. And there are people who would say, oh, okay, there will be no tariffs. And then they create other forms of artificial barriers like dumping duties, country of origin. There's a lot of economists talk about. Why? Because to protect your small companies. Sometimes it's good. Why? Because if your company is small, United States, my company is small, I want to protect it. If I have a son and I'm letting him box with the heavyweight champion of the world, and my son wants to, like 16-year-old, he's going to get killed. Small company cannot compete with a big company. But if you let him grow, train him, feed him, maybe he gets strong, and then he could compete with the heavyweight boxing champion, he would survive. So some countries protect that. Nokia is a company which was protected for a long time before it becomes the giant it did to compete internationally by its country. So government needs to step in and protect. Americans did that too. Early, Alexander Hamilton wrote this essay to Congress. Alexander Hamilton, the guy in the $10 bill, right, one of the founding fathers, wrote American companies should be protected from the British giants because infant industry syndrome. I don't want my little son to go and fight a heavyweight champion until he's prepared and ready. You following? Okay. All right. Third one. Write it down. Or not third one. Let's go to a next idea. Next idea is two things: poverty and inequality. Poverty. When you talk about poverty, you could take a whole class on poverty. You could talk for poverty for an entire course. Okay. There are economists who made a living career, decades of research on poverty. Some of the books are not the poverty itself. Some of the ideas to alleviate the poverty is fun to study. I'm going to discuss only very little here. Poverty is defined by the World Bank, global poverty. And there's about 1 billion people in absolute poverty. So how do you define absolute poverty? It used to be $1 per day. Dollar per day is what one makes. If you make more than $2, you're below $2, you're impoverished, poverty. Below $1, it's absolute poverty. Now it's like $1.25. Okay. And you might think, if you're never went outside the United States, how could you get even a bottle of water for that? Yeah, many countries, the money goes a long way. It's called purchasing power parity, PPP. Okay, there's another way to measure. PPP is like, it might cost a lot here, like in the United States, to go and get a decent meal, not like fancy, decent meal might be $10, $15. I don't know, Chipotle, $10. But in, say, from where I come from, you could get a decent meal for $2. So it varies. If you go to Mexico, also similar. For $1,000, I was reading yesterday, American woman, moved there after retirement. She gets about $1,000 from Social Security. She makes a great life near the beach for $1,000. Many of the retired people move to Thailand, taking American retirement money. Money goes a long way. So poverty, 1 billion people in absolute poverty, especially in Southeast Asia. Cambodia is one of the most impoverished countries in Southeast Asia. Sub-Saharan African countries have. And poverty alleviation itself is a goal. China had brought millions of people out of poverty because of the government programs of unleashing the free market economy. And before it was communist, now the political party in power is communist, but free market economics. It's Deng Xiaoping. We'll talk about that when we talk about China. Released this power of the markets, so they have brought out hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Are you following? and poverty is getting reduced around the world. But still, there's poverty. Still, people die of hunger, okay, in this world. And not to make us feel guilty, but it is true. If we are wasting food, think about it. There are people around the world still malnourished. India is one of the highest malnourished country for children, and millions die every year. Now, what is inequality? Inequality is different from poverty. Inequality, economic way to measure is called Gini coefficient index. I'll write it down. Gini is Gini, Gini coefficient index. Okay, so in the United States is one of the highest unequal country in the world. What do you mean unequal? Unequal means that there are, okay, let me put it this way. There are the top three rich guys. You take those three guys in America, their combined wealth is more than the bottom 50% of Americans' wealth. Bottom 50% is like more than 150 million Americans' wealth put together is less than three guys in the top. It's talking about inequality. American inequality is increasing. In the 1990s, it used to be 0.43. Oh, what does Gini coefficient index 0.43 mean? Now it's like 0.48. I'll explain what does this number mean. So they measure 0 to 1. 0 means everybody in the society is equal. There's no society like that. Okay, not even communistic societies. The guys in the power have one, means one person have everything in the society and others don't. America, if it is increasing, that means it's becoming more and more unequal. One means everybody has nothing except one person has everything. But it's trending in the direction that is bad. Why is it bad? Why is it bad? Downside of inequality. Trust goes down in societies. They measure. So countries like Nordic countries, which is less unequal, they have free market economy, and we talked about it. Less unequal means trust is higher. Why is trust important? Because happiness, it affects happiness. One of the things, political participation, a lot of things. You don't trust your neighbor. So trust could be measured by the social scientists in different ways. One way they measure is putting a wallet in the public place with money, little money, and the return address, and find how many of them get returned, how many of the wallets. So even I have found sometimes, and then I look around, is there anybody watching and learning? One time I found like $1,000, and we took it to the police station and gave it. Yeah, the police wrote it down for a year. They wait for somebody to come and claim, and nobody came and claimed. Then they gave me a check. So trust less societies, actually less wallets gets returned. Similarly, you could see it in behavior as well. Like, would you push a child in a perambulator or stroller in America, and you see a nice cloth inside a store, you leave the stroller on the sidewalk and go and check the cloth? Some countries they would do. I've heard my Israeli students say they would do it in Israel. And Nordic countries they do. Not in India, definitely not in America. Say bye-bye to the baby. Yeah, baby is gone. That's trust erodes with higher inequality, because it also creates unrest, political unrest, and which is not healthy for any democracy. Are you following? The people who are hurting will sometimes fall for the demagoguery speeches of politicians. So trust is vital. Countries' equality is good. High inequality is not. Now, that's the role of the government and the people to decide. America is a very highly individualistic society, so they also want to have minimum role of the government when it comes to intervening in people's money. So more freedom, less equality. You understand? Okay. So now, HDI, Human Development Index. This is a measurement. So many countries think, oh, I'm successful. My country is successful based on their GDP. What is GDP? Gross domestic product. What does that mean? Well, that means the entire, put a dollar sign in all the services provided and the goods manufactured, value. You add that value, that's the gross domestic product. Value of all the products and services inside a country, that's GDP. Okay. Now divide that by the number of people in the country, and that's GDP per capita. So GDP per capita, if you have high, people say, oh, cool. Then you have good things going for you. Even though China's economy is almost catching up with the United States and it's going to overtake the United States, if you look at GDP, because GDP is how it's measured, the number of people in China is way more in number, 1.3 billion compared to 315 million. So United States, GDP per capita is high. It's good. Good so far. Now, Human Development Index measures GDP per capita, not just that alone. Also the life expectancy. Why life expectancy? Because in poor countries, usually life expectancy is shorter in general. Okay? Sub-Saharan African countries are very short. They have civil wars and things, that's like 35 years. Life expectancy is, that's, you go back to 19th century, early 19th century America, that's what the life expectancy was in the United States. Now it's like 78 or 80, right? Women have a little more than men. But 35, really, in 21st century? And India is at most 10 years life expectancy shorter than the United States. But the United States is not like thump the chest as the number one. Japan, many of the Nordic countries, Canada has longer life expectancy. And so they take that into account also, not GDP per capita, Human Development Index. And education of the population, education. You know how much percentage of Americans have college degree? Yes. Less than 30%. Less than 30% of Americans have college degree. So if you're getting college degree, you come in the top 30%, you're privileged. Me too. But master's and doctorate put me in the top 1% of educated. That's a privilege you have and I have. And we have responsibilities because of that through education. That's a different story to talk about. So Human Development Index is measuring all these different things according to the UN to see which country is doing well, better. Are you following? Okay. Now you might think, okay, so if a country is doing economically good, that's great, right? That's how we measure which country is doing GDP or GDP per capita. Happiness. We all want to be happy. GDP per capita, does it have an impact in happiness? Yes. Yes, up to a point. When you write happiness and write this below. There's a paradox. The paradox is called Easterlin paradox. It's named after the economist Easterlin, Easterlin, Easterlin paradox. Poor countries have lesser happiness, the people. Rich countries in general have more happiness. But that doesn't mean you get richer and richer, your happiness increases with it. There's a threshold. They say $7,000 to, how much is it? $10,000 to $15,000. $10,000 to $15,000. Why did I say 7,000? Because I'll tell you why. $10,000 to $15,000 is still in paradox. GDP per capita. And then below that means you will be tended to be unhappy if you're living in the country with GDP per capita less than that. Over that, you're unhappy. But that doesn't mean you will be happier with higher income. This is like this. if you're unhealthy, I read a lot of happiness books. I love reading happiness books. We all strive for it, and we want to know what makes us happy and doesn't, right? So when you're unhealthy, you're unhappy. If you're healthy, you will be happier compared to than when you were unhealthy and unhappier. But as your health increases and increases, like you're building muscle mass and you're like an Olympic athlete, that doesn't mean your happiness will be increasing along with from the point of healthiness to like super athlete. That means you'll be super happy now. Similar comparison is also for individual income. There's a Princeton University study which put your happiness increases. Say you're making 40,000 a year and you make 50,000, your happiness increases. They measured up to 70,000, it increases. Then it doesn't have an impact, money. Really? If you make $1 million, you're not. No. Well, come on. Professor, you win $10 million, wouldn't you be happy? I'd be happy. Now, 2 years follow-up study, my happiness will be similar to that of before winning the lottery. Really? Yeah, they've done studies. Same with people who lose their limbs, legs, before and after 2 years. Immediately after losing, they're going to be unhappy in an accident or other forms. But 2 years later, follow-up study, the happiness is where it was. Isn't it interesting? Human capacity for happiness. So this happiness has to be measured for the well-being. Because if you ask Eleanor Roosevelt, she said, proving the welfare of the people, welfare means not the welfare state, welfare of the people is the role of the government. So Bhutan measures happiness of its people to see how they do, rather than measuring the GDP per capita of the country. Country like Costa Rica is happier than the United States, than the Americans. Average happiness of Americans compared to Costa Ricans, they are happier. They're not rich like us. And there are countries, blue zone regions, they study these regions of happiness. In America, you know which town is happier? San Luis Obispo, at least. That was studied. I lived there for a year. And I could talk why that places are happy, but it's not relevant because it's not a country, it's a region. So if you're interested further, check out this book if you're interested. Geography of Bliss. It talks about different countries the author goes to. It's like a travelogue and also studies happiness. It's fascinating. Denmark almost always comes in the top, #1 happy country in the world. Yeah, United States, no, not even in the top 5. Whereas HDI, Human Development Index, which country comes? Norway, another Nordic country, HDI. You know which country is bottom at the time? At least when they measured, it was Niger in Africa. Yeah, the same country where Saddam Hussein was alleged to got a yellow cake for the uranium, not bakery cake. Okay. So the last one for you to think about is happiness. Is it the role of government? Should government help or at least nudge? Because there's certain people would say nudge rather than like direct hand of the government. Some people will say government has to play a strong role. Some people will say at least just nudge them in the middle ground. Some people will say no, government's role is not in making people happy. Usually people in conservative side or believe in small government will say that. People in strong government roles will prefer that. So based on countries, governments, and remember, we talked about ideology, how much they want to achieve equality and others, they will intervene and create happiness. Happiness is created in many forms by governments. I'll give you one way. Protection, safety nets. Safety nets. Yeah, if you're doing acrobatics, you have safety nets in the circle. Similarly, protection of like unemployment benefits or health care, NHS. In England, you're taken care. Corona crisis hits, Here, people, not for the vaccine, at least the government provide for that, but hospital bills you incur, even copays will make people go bankrupt. Yeah, the number one reason for people filing bankruptcy in America is healthcare bills. Even if you have an insurance, the copay alone will, even if it's like 5%, 10%, $1 million, how much would it be? $100,000, 10% is. That's a lot of money. Most Americans don't have $400, especially after retirement, to write a check. Are you following? Yeah. So countries which give safety net, like Iceland, for example, people try out different fields. Average Icelander transfers 5 different fields entirely. Try out and see. Americans don't have that luxury. I have to do whatever, even if it's boring, mind-numbing. I got to pay bills. I got to do this. So how far is government's role in making the society overall feel good, welfare? In India, we don't have even, if you have money, when I was sick, when I was in college, to get out of the hospital, you got to pay the bills before they let you go out. In fact, some of the care, every time before giving the care, they will ask you to pay. If you don't pay, they won't even give you the care while you are in the hospital. Not in the US. So countries vary. You following? And those safety nets have an impact on individuals' ability to live a full-fledged life and a thriving life, maybe. Good luck watching the documentary I put for you as well, and looking forward to reading your answers.